Welcome to the video today. We'll be doing another walkthrough of a TryHackMe room called Startup. This room was pretty interesting. It definitely involved a skill that I haven't seen in some other of the TryHackMe rooms, which is looking at a Wireshark or PCAP dump of traffic and then discerning information out of that. So I thought this was a pretty cool room that can try to kind of show some of the tools you can use to examine PCAPs and stuff like that. So yeah, let's get into the room. Let's look at what we're doing. So this is another challenge room. Not much guidance on it. Just ask you the three questions. I already have it deployed out. So like any other time that we do these CTF type challenges, I like to make sure that I stay in scope. And so what I do then is I go ahead and put the IP address into a targets file. This makes sure that whenever we use other tools that we can just reference this targets file and not have to look back as much. So now with that in there, we can start the Nmap scanning. So we are going to do an initial scan. That's going to be SV-T5. And now that we have that IP in that targets file, you'll notice I'm doing a $ open parentheses cat targets.txt. And so if you've seen maybe some other streams or whatever, what I'm doing here is I'm telling Bash to execute those commands inside that parentheses first and then replace the results out of that command into the line. And this is a way to kind of incorporate a lot of different techniques or things that are in different files without having to remember whatever was in that file. So in this case, we're just catting out the IP address. So I'm also going to go ahead and set up the detailed scanning so we can get both going at the same time. So on the top here we have Nmap. We're doing service versions. T5 is the speed to do it. Then we're catting out the targets file, which is just basically replacing this section with IP address, and then outputting all formats, and then labeling those outputs as init. And then in the bottom section here, what we're doing is the same thing, except now we're invoking the script engine in Nmap. And Nmap has categories to run scripts, and so we're running the default, the version, the vuln, any FTP scripts that it finds, so any script that starts with FTP, and then any HTTP scripts that it finds. We're putting a timeout limit on those of 2 minutes. Some of the Nmap scripting scripts will actually just never finish, and that's just due to the nature of some of the scripts. And then we're outputting all formats, which is grep, Nmap, and text, and labeling those as detailed. So we're going to kick off both of those. All right, so we see the initial scan came back really quickly, of course, and we kind of start getting an idea of what the system is doing here. So we have an FTP service, we have a OpenSSH, and an Apache HTTP server. Nmap is identifying this as a Ubuntu Unix server, Ubuntu from the banner version of Apache, and Unix Linux based off of the way that the OS is performing back with the scans. So while the detailed scan's going, we can go into the FTP service and kind of start looking at some of that. So again, we'll do FTP. Whoops. And we're going to continue using that targets file. We'll do, again, a cat targets file, so that's going to replace that with that IP address. And it's asking us for a login. So the most common FTP login is anonymous. And then you can either put no password or IE or user at IE or whatever. But most of the time, anonymous and just a blank password works if anonymous login's been set up on the FTP. So this is the first finding basically for this system, right? Is that it has one, a clear text protocol, which is FTP, and then the second finding would be that it is using an anonymous account on that FTP service. The reason you don't want that is you want to be able to log whatever users are logging into the system and know who to trace that back to. And an anonymous account is not traceable. It's anonymous. The only thing I have maybe in the logs is an IP address from where that came from. But those could be proxied or jumped around, so that really doesn't help. All right, so we're on this FTP server, and we might as well go ahead and look at the files. So there's two commands to kind of list out files in FTP, and there are big differences on those commands. So some guides will tell you to do dir, and if you do dir, you'll see the files on there. We can see that there's an FTP directory. We see that there's an important.jpg and a notice.txt, right? But what you're doing is you're robbing yourself of hidden files. So I tell people to do an ls-al, just like you do in Linux. And if you do this, it will show those hidden files, and you'll notice now we got a .test log that came out of there. So again, this is a way to reveal those hidden files that might be in there. So we'll want to go ahead and download all these files. Yeah, I don't think that worked. So we'll do git. We'll have to type these out. So that's going to download the test.log. We'll go ahead and download the important.jpg. I'll increase the verbosity down here and see how close we are to getting done. And then we're going to go get notice.txt. Okay. So now we downloaded the 3 files that we saw on there, but again, if we go back to our listing of the directory, we notice there's an additional directory, the FTP directory. So we need to cd into that FTP directory and see what files are in there. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to ls-al. And there's no files in there, and that's fine. So we do have some of the files that we can look at. And so we'll go to another terminal here. Again, we're in that same directory that we were in before that we created. We're going to go ahead and make a loot directory. And the reasoning for this is as I pull files off of a system and things, I want to put it in a different directory than my scanning and things like that, so that I can have a better idea as I go through these tests that these are artifacts off the system or these are artifacts that were generated because I did something. So in a real pen test, I'd almost create a directory for scans, and then I would create a directory for screenshots, and I'd create a directory for system files or files downloaded and things like that. So keeping these directory structures will help you later when you're doing the reporting section. So let's go ahead and move these files over, and so you can kind of see that I've had a little bit of this already. So we'll just do the files that I've downloaded. Okay, so if we go into the loot directory, let's cat the notice. So notice says whoever is leaving these damn Among Us memes in the share, it's not funny. People downloading documents from our website will think we are a joke. Now I don't know who it is, but Maya is looking pretty sus. And then I'm guessing that basically that's going to be the important.jpg is going to be something relating to that. So we'll look at that real quick. Startup, loot, folder. So there you go. All right. We do have an image, and mostly in CTFs, anytime that you download an image or thing like that, you kind of want to run, a little bit of like strings and stuff like that to see if there's anything hidden in it. We'll do an exfil real quick too. So here's strings, and this is more really in a CTF type or gaming type environment. It rarely happens in real world pen tests that you're downloading something like this and people have put in Stego stuff in JPEGs. But yeah, an attacker could do it, right? Like if they wanted to get data out of your system, that'd be a way to do it, right? So let's do exfil tool and important. Okay, so nothing out of the ordinary here. Again, we're looking for something that would stand out. So, okay. So we'll go back to where we're at, and looks like our advanced scanning is done. So let's look to see if they found anything more from there. So again, it did find the same ports. The FTP root service found no valid accounts, which must not have been really trying because Banana's worked pretty easily. We do see some SSH RSA host keys, so that is a way to kind of identify the system. And then for our port 80, again, we do see that it is an Apache structure. It didn't really try too many files or directories. And then based on the server version, it's kind of saying that here's some exploits maybe. And that might be something that we can look at later on if we need that. But okay, so not much from that. Not much else on the FTP service. So let's go ahead and let's run GoBuster while we look at the web service. So again, we want to have our longer running task in the background while we do these things. All right. So I'm just going to copy this over here. All right, so we're running GoBuster. We're giving it the dir command, telling it the URL, again, http:// and then we're doing that bash inclusion there where we're just catting out the targets file. And then we're using a word list. This is a standard word list on most Kali installations. And then we're outputting those results into GoBuster results.txt. So again, if you've never used GoBuster before, what it's taking is it's trying every one of these words in this word list, and it's basically trying to go to these directories. And so immediately we see files, but let's go to the web server, let's see what's there, and then let's go to files and see what's there. So we're just going to copy this IP address, open up a new tab, we're going to go there. And it says no spice here. Please excuse us as we develop our site. We want to make the most stylish, convenient way to buy peppers. Plus, we need a web developer. By the way, if you're a web developer, contact us. And there's nothing to that link there. Otherwise, don't worry. We'll be online shortly. Dev team. Okay, so we want to also view page source. Again, mostly in these CTF environments. And in some real world pen test, I've ran into actually having developers who'd put comments in their web page for something and then forgotten about it as they're developing, which is pretty crazy, but it does happen. So in this instance here, we see that there's really nothing of value added, right? And so we're still, we still have access to the FTP server, and the only additional information now is that we have is the files. So let's go to the files directory and see what's that about. Okay, so we see an index of files. We kind of notice there's a notice.txt, and that's looking pretty much the same as what we just saw, what we downloaded. And same thing there. So that's pretty interesting. And then there's an FTP directory, which has nothing in it. So based on this indication, so this is another finding. Let's go ahead and add that. So this finding would be that directory listing is turned on on files. And with that, let's see if we can do anything with that FTP directory. So again, we're in. Oh, it canceled out, so we'll need to exit. We could do a connect, but just doing it this way is sometimes easier. Anonymous space. We're gonna cd into FTP. Okay, this is where we're at. LSLAAL. Sorry. All right, and then we just want to. So on our host computer, we'll do a echo test to a text file, and then we're gonna put that test.txt. All right, transfer complete. So it uploaded it. And so we'll refresh this page. Nothing changed here. We'll go into the FTP directory. There's our test, and we see test. So that is a good indication that we are able to upload files to the server and then run those files. So you're probably asking at this point, okay, well, what do I run? That this is a web server. And this is where web shells kind of come into play. So there are many different web shells, and each one kind of depends on like what's your underlining web server, what's it running, things like that. So let me open up a new terminal here, and what we'll do is in Kali, if you do web shells, it will list out where these web shells are at, and it actually just CDs you into that directory. So now you have like an ASP, ASPX, Cold Fusion module, Java server page, Perl, and PHP. This is one way to do that. There's also Landrum, which it didn't list out, but anyways. So you could go to each directory, right? You could then upload this PHP reverse shell after you edit it, and then we'll run through the same type process. I'm gonna do it with Metasploit just to do it with Metasploit, but it's basically the same process. So you'll edit the PHP file, then you'll upload it to the server, then you'll have the web server basically execute it, and it executes that code. Now, what we'll see later too is that the reason that this executes that code is because PHP is running in a mode where it actually will run system commands, which this is another finding where PHP should not have the ability to run system commands, but that's something to tackle later. They already have a lot of problems as it is, apparently. All right, we need to get back to our main directory. So let's get back to there. TryHackMe, we are on startup. Whoops. Go. Okay, so we're back in our main directory. We're going to go ahead and make a directory called Payload. All right. We can kill this one. And we want to probably exit this, and we're going to go into Payload on the FTP server. So I'm changing my directory on my host system, and then when we're ready, once we generate the shell, we'll reconnect to it to upload the shell, basically. All right, so that's clear. We can just exit this. We'll leave GoBuster running in case there's other directories. We're not really expecting any, but we'll do that. All right, so let's go back to this one here. Actually, what we'll do is we'll split this window because it'll be good to have the FTP server up here as we do some uploads and stuff like that. All right. So like I said, we're going to generate the payload with Metasploit. And if you've never used Metasploit before, there's so much functionality to it, so much additional little features and things like that it kind of helps to have that framework under your belt and used it a couple of times. So the way that you can do payloads is you can go into the framework and then try to generate them, or use MSF Venom. So MSF Venom is the command line. It's a little less interactive, um, but it really works out great in a pinch. So what we're going to do here is we want MSF Venom to list out its payloads, and then we're piping that into grep, and we're only looking for PHP payloads. Um, and so I'm kind of giving a little hint here, but we're going to run a PHP shell, and we want to see what MSF Venom has to do this. So MSF Venom is running the command, and then all that text is going to get piped, and then only the lines with PHP in them are going to get printed out. And in the terminal, you'll notice that gets highlighted as red, basically. So you'll see here in many different spots, where PHP was found. For our case, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want PHP Meterpreter reverse TCP. So Meterpreter is a specialized reverse shell that Metasploit has all these additional functionalities, and so that's the shell that we want to get. All right, so we're going to so now that we know what shell that we want, we specify that with the -p for payload, and we just specify the Meterpreter. In this case, we're doing where is it at right here? This is a stager Meterpreter, and then we're listing out the options for that payload, and so this is so that we can set them later. Each payload might have different things like encryption or encoding or things like that, and so listing out the options lets you know what you can set. All right, so for this interpreter payload, the basic options are lhost and lport, so we need to specify that on the command line. And then these are the advanced options if you wanted to specify any of these. Again, majority of the time, unless you're doing like staging and coding and things like that, then you're not touching these. All right. So now we are calling the payload PHP Meterpreter reverse TCP. We're setting that option, the lhost, right there to the IP address. This is the IP address on my TUN0. This IP address will be different for you. If you connect to the TryHackMe labs, you'll have a different IP address. Lport is the listening port. That's the port that we want to listen on. And then R is just raw. That's going to be the raw shell. So for PHP, raw shell is going to be text, right? But for some of your other Linux shells or Windows shells, that could be a binary format. So then you need to specify like ELF or a PE for a portable executable for Windows. ELF is for Linux. And then we're going to pipe that output into MSF PHP rev shell 555.php. So we're labeling what this file is so that we remember what this is. Okay. All right. So MSF Venom comes back and it says it's done, and so we'll definitely see that this file's there. Let's go ahead and move that file again into the payloads directory again, just to kind of keep this in place. Another thing about keeping your payloads in a certain directory is these are artifacts that you can have the blue team look for, that they should be able to identify, or payloads that they should have caught when they're on the systems. In this case, we're going to have to upload this to the web server, so this should definitely catch this, right? Like, but it shouldn't be a big thing. Okay, so we generated this PHP file, but we just want to look at it, make sure we know what it's doing before we upload it to a system. So what we'll do is I have Visual Studio Code installed in in my version of Kali. And so we'll do code and we'll call the PHP. And because I'm running an older version of Kali that's just been updated, I'm still root on my system. On the newer versions of Kali, you end up setting up a user. So code does not like to be ran as root, so we have to specify a user data directory for it to write into. So here's Visual Studio Code bringing up the file. So it brings it up kind of small at first. We're going to close all these little notifications, and then what we'll do is we're going to zoom in to the text. And then on Visual Studio Code, by pushing Alt and Z, it will wrap the lines so that it fits into the terminal. All right, so we're seeing here, again, this is a PHP file. The magic behind it is that it's basically specifying an IP address into a variable called IP, a port number into port, and then if it can open up a stream socket client that it's assigning to a variable and it's callable, then it will do that. It will basically open that stream socket via TCP IP and port number as a type stream. And then if stream and the socket are fsock open and is callable, then it'll, basically this is building out like a stream and a socket and making that connection happen. And if that happens, then it's going to read data in and it's going to put data back out through that. One of the things that you need to do whenever you get a PHP shell from Metasploit is it puts a comment as the first two characters there for the PHP. And again, that's just to prevent you from accidentally uploading it and not removing that. So we're removing those two characters, and then we're going to save it. You don't have to close off the PHP file. You can, but it's kind of recommended that you leave it open, because depending on how this code lands on different places, you might not want to close the PHP file. So like in some of your word presses and things like that, it's going to recognize this PHP file and it's going to do all these executions. But like in WordPress, it needs to do other things like post the footer and stuff like that. So having it close off that might break the functionality of that web application. So leaving this not closed is not a bad thing. All right, so we're done with this. We'll close that file. This is ready to go. We're ready to upload. Again, we need to get into our payloads directory here. All right, and we are ready to go, right? So we're going to go ahead and do the FTP connection. So now that we move directories, that file is not exactly there. I need to do a dot in front of there. So // So we're going back to the startup directory to read the file there, and you'll see how that works out. Okay, so anonymous, clicking and just pushing enter there. All right, that was a little bit slower than it should have been. FTP. All right, and then now we are going to put, and we're going to put the MSF file. Oops. There we go. We're going to put the MSF PHP rev shell 555.php file, and that's going to put that onto the web server. So we see that that's successful, and we'll do an ls just to make sure. Web server's really running slow now. All right, well that's running. What we need to also do is we need to go ahead and set up the listener. So we see that it's up there. So the listener, the way we start that is going to do an MFS console. So this is the actual console version of Metasploit. Okay. We're going to use exploit multi-handler. This is basically a generic like catch for Metasploit payloads. If I typed it right. There we go. All right, and then we need to specify the payload. So it needs to know when it receives a connection, what should it expect, right? And so we're doing the same payload that we specified earlier in the MSF Venom. So now we set that payload. We're going to set the listening host. So that's us, of course, 10.0. So that's going to listen on the tunnel 0, and then what port that's going to be. And then I like to set exit on session as false. And what this means